Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Moira Jones and Eleni Pachou. We are going to Scotland. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! Where is all my things I need? Over here. So, I have a slight issue with one of my teeth. Please excuse me today if I look odd or I look like I'm doing something weird with my mouth, because I lost part of my tooth. Oh, it feels a bit... yeah. Basically, part of my tooth fell off. I'm very conscious of another part falling out of my face. So if I look more strange than normal, that is why. Tooth problems. Without further ado, let's dive on into today's case. 2 murders, 2 women within 2 days, 2 different killers, all in one city. Not a good couple of days for Glasgow at all. Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. So, 28th of May 2008, 40-year-old Moira Jones went over to her boyfriend's flat. He was Paul Thompson, and they had an evening together, and she'd taken her overnight bag. They didn't live together, but she'd taken her overnight bag. However, they had a row. They had a disagreement, falling out, tiff, whatever you want to call it, and Moira ended up going home. She parked her car across the road from where she lived, but she would never make it to her front door. Moira was an executive for Britvic, which is a company, I believe, is it water filters and things like that? Or am I totally wrong? Is Britvic bottled water? Moira had moved to Glasgow from London in 2003 for work, and she really loved living in Glasgow. She was enjoying her life there. The following morning, the 29th of May, Moira's body was found in the park. Her flat looked over Queen's Park, and her body was found in Queen's Park. Behind a small privet hedge, she was found by a park ranger. She had no clothes on from the waist down, and the clothes that she did have on her top half had been torn and ripped. Her shirt, for example, was missing all of its buttons. The police arrived really quickly and they locked down the park. It's like 148 acres of park. So they locked it down and they focused on the crime scene, but obviously they had to check everywhere in this park. Moira's autopsy showed that she had been beaten severely. Most of the injuries and bruising to her head and neck area. She also had defensive bruising on the backs of her arms and her hands. Her body had over 65 injuries from stomping and punching. She suffered a broken cheekbone, a broken nose, there was damage to her windpipe, and she also had brain damage. The bruising to her neck and the damage to her windpipe suggested that she'd been pinned down by her neck by like an arm or a leg or something like that. Just awful. Semen was retrieved from Moira, but it was not a match to anything that they had in the system at that time. The police began piecing together what had happened to Moira. They went to her apartment and they found that her car was there and parked. But then in the surrounding areas, on the road even, on the grass verges and things like that, they found lots of her belongings. So if you remember, she had her overnight bag with her. It looked like she had got out of her vehicle with her bag and all of her stuff, and then somebody had attacked her there and then, or like there was some sort of altercation because her stuff was like strewn everywhere. Strewn? I think that is an English word. Strewn. Now all I can think about is strudel. Frickin' Nora. Apple strudel. Police appealed to witnesses and they started doing door-to-door searches because somebody might have heard something. She was attacked out in the street. They then found bus cam footage. I think it's very difficult to see what's going on, but obviously the police have, they would have looked at it really close, slowed it down and looked at it really closely. But apparently I'll share the CCTV, there are 2 figures and one is sort of bundling the other person along. In my head, I thought, did he have a weapon? So he was coercing her to go where he wanted her to go, or a lot stronger than her. a lot stronger, so he could just sort of almost carry her where he wanted her to go. A witness came forward to say that in the park that the night before, they had heard something suspicious in a bushy area. And reading between the lines, it sounds like from what I read and what I saw, that they were describing, they thought someone was fooling around, like, but like lovers. So how wrong they were. However, another witness that walked past that night and heard commotion and stuff, strange things happening in those bushes, they said, if we hear that somebody was murdered here, we've just heard them be murdered. I mean, they were right. They were witnessing or hearing Moira's last moments. In this bushed area, the police found 6 of Moira's buttons. So it is thought that that is the place where she was initially attacked and assaulted. And quite quickly they realised that whoever this man was very strong, because they managed to attack Moira at her car, walk her along to the entrance of a park, or drag her, or whatever. They managed to get her with force to the park, into this bushed area, where she was then assaulted and attacked, and then dragged or carried or pulled to another area of the park where the attack continued, and then where her body was found. And that would be, so it was a strong man. The police also they traced his exit out of the park, a big park, so he could have gone a number of ways, but they managed to work out which way he had gone and how he'd left, which is important because they were then obviously going to look at CCTV. Who's whistling? I don't like whistling, it reminds me of Walking Dead, Negan. Don't be whistling, please. If Paul came and made me jump now, I would have an accident, telling you right now. Okay, I think we're safe. They traced his exit and they were able to do so because this piece of work had gone through the remainder of what was in Moira's bag to see, if there was anything of value to him. So he robbed her after he had attacked and killed her. He scattered some of these things around as he left the park. Why? Don't know. Anyway, but 2 of those things, she had 2 mobile phones on her, and he took them and he dumped them. Did he think that she was still alive and he didn't want her to have any means of calling for help? Sick. I'm not sure. Or did he have a look and think, oh, they're not worth any money? I don't know, but he dumped those and some other items, like a trail of breadcrumbs, out of the park. Thank you. So they were able to look at the CCTV opposite the exit of the park that he had taken, and it showed a large man leaving the park at 2:17 a.m. And they managed to follow him on CCTV and show the route that he took. They see that at one point he's got her laptop, and then when he moves between cameras, all of a sudden he hasn't got her laptop, so he must have dumped it and got rid of it. I'm not sure what he was doing with all of her belongings, because did he hide it to come back and find it? I'm not sure. A very odd behaviour, but he then ended up not having her laptop, and he had an unusual walk. He had a bit of a weird walk. Other than that, it was difficult to... CCTV is grainy, isn't it? It's so hard to see. I just think that's really crazy, isn't it? With all of the technology and all of the things that we can do, and yet CCTV is like, I say, what? Who? Like, you can't make out a feature in lots of CC, it's just mad. Anyway, I shouldn't knock it because it's very helpful, even when it is grainy. So eventually they lose him on the CCTV. They don't know where he's gone and they can't find any more footage of him. While investigators and police, and there's a lot of manpower going into Moira's case, because it's a very, that is a big case. Somebody has just been murdered in the park by somebody they suspect that she doesn't know, and that is unusual. I think it is a very, very high percentage, I don't know the exact figure, I did know it, of women that when they are murdered, it is by their partners or ex-partners. So it is unusual, really, for a woman to be killed by a stranger, and this is what it looked like had happened in this case. So, lots of manpower was going into searching for Moira's killer. So it really put a strain on the police when 2 days later, on the 31st of May, another woman was murdered. 8:30 that morning, the body of Eleni Pachou was found at her workplace. I think it's pronounced DiMaggio's, D-I space M-A-G-G-I-O. It was a pizzeria. The cleaner, Marion Hinchelwood, and another restaurant employee found Eleni's body, and they made a 999 call to the police. Eleni and Moira, in some ways, had something in common. So they had both relocated to Glasgow. Eleni was 25. She was originally from Greece, Athens. I know it's a real place, but to me, that just almost sounds like, wow, people really actually live there and come from there. Because to me, I just think mythology, and I don't know, my brain almost thinks it's not real. But it is, completely. I was like, what? Athens? Wow. So she was from there anyway, get over it, Soph. And she had moved to Glasgow 2.5 years before her death. Her mother had died, and she had come to Glasgow to start a new life. And I found that was a parallel really with Moira, because Moira had moved, albeit she'd been there longer, but she'd also moved to start again. Eleni had found work at the popular pizzeria, and then she had been promoted to assistant manager. Eleni was found stabbed to death, and all of her clothes were on her body, suggesting that this was not a sexually motivated attack. But the two safes that were in the restaurant, one of them had been ransacked and emptied, and the other one had been tampered with. Like, they had tried very, very hard to get into that safe without any success. Eleni had been stabbed 17 times. There were wounds to her face, her neck, to her spleen, her kidney, and with great force. It was an incredibly brutal attack. Some of the wounds were as long as 5 inches long, and they had perforated multiple organs, and she had been stabbed so hard and ferociously that the handle of the knife had come off, it had snapped off. It was clear that Eleni's killer had killed her first and then gone on his hunt for money, because he hadn't left any fingerprints. He was wearing gloves. However, there was blood smeared all over the place. It was on the safes, it was on the staircase, and based on the blood evidence, he had walked over Eleni's body a number of times during his quest for money. It's very cold, isn't it? Very cold. Now, investigators ruled out the possibility that these two murders were linked. They didn't think it was the same person. One was a sexually motivated attack, and one was a robbery. Eleni's killer had left a gift for investigators because, as I said, the attack was ferocious, and in that process he had cut himself, which is actually quite common when killers use a knife, and he had dropped some of his blood. And the reason that they knew, I'm so paranoid about the tooth falling out. The reason that they knew that some of the blood was his was the placement of that blood. So there were drops of blood at the bottom of the stairs as you would leave the restaurant. But it had been proved that Eleni had been murdered in the hallway, and that she hadn't then moved. She wasn't moved after that. So her blood could not possibly be at the bottom of the staircase as you leave the restaurant. So it had to be the killer's blood. So they took that off for testing. Would you believe? But they found a match. And it was a former employee of the pizzeria, Carlos Crispin. What a name. He was swiftly arrested. There was also, at this time, a break in Moira's case. So the police are out canvassing and doing door-to-door knock-knocks. What is that? Door-to-door inquiries, Sophie. And they came across a large house that had been made into bedsits. They knocked on the door of one of these bedsits and they spoke to a woman called Lucy Pechlova. Police ask everyone a number of questions when they're doing their door-to-door inquiries, like who lives here or blah, blah, blah. But they also ask, luckily, if anybody has been staying with you. I wouldn't even think that, but yeah, that's clever, isn't it? And thank God, because Lucy then divulged that she had, at the time of Moira's murder, she had a guest staying with her. He was a kickboxer from Slovakia, Marek Harkar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his surname right. That doesn't seem right to me. However, we'll go with it. I'm going to have to call him Marek because I don't think I'm saying his surname right at all. He was 33 years old. He was a former soldier. He was 6'3", so big chap. Lucy had met him in 2007 when they had worked in Liverpool together, and then he had since, at this time he'd come back and he needed somewhere to stay, so he stayed with Lucy. Lucy regretted her choices quickly about letting Marek stay with her because his behaviour was not what she expected. Instead of going out and looking for work and trying to sort his life out, he stayed at home in bed and watched porn all the time. So yeah, I bet she wanted him out quick. Lucy's bedsit was a very short walk from Queen's Park, where Moira's body was found, and as well as laying in bed all day watching porn, he also drank very heavily. So he was not the ideal house guest, let's just say. Lucy told police that Marek had left on the night of Moira's murder at 10 p.m. and he was heavily intoxicated. He'd been drinking vodka and beer, and he was so drunk. Also, he had been watching lots of porn, and he left the apartment and said to Lucy that he was going to find a woman. She assumed a lady of the night, and that is not what he did. She said he then returned at 3:15 a.m. and that would match up with him leaving the park at 2:17 and taking a wander around and dumping Moira's belongings and things like that. It was looking like they had found their guy. Lucy also said that when he returned to the bedsit, he was very agitated and he was quite stressed out, like something had happened to him. And then 2 days later or 3 days later, on the 1st of June, he left. He just left, and he left his belongings at the bedsit, at Lucy's place. Lucy handed over his belongings to the police so that they could test those for DNA, and his DNA on his belongings was a match to the DNA found on Moira's body. And also he'd left a black leather jacket that he'd obviously worn that night, and it had Moira's blood on it, and he'd left it all there. And then it turns out that he'd hopped on a plane and then a bus, and he'd returned to Slovakia. Again, another similarity between the cases, even though they're not linked. In Eleni's case, it became apparent that she had too welcomed somebody back into her life, and it was with dire consequences. She had worked with Crispin at the pizzeria. He had then left the pizzeria and gone to another restaurant that was like in the same chain. But they had kept in touch in a similar fashion to Lucy and Marek. So on the night in question, the 31st of May, Crispin reached out and asked if he could meet with Eleni at the restaurant because he knew that she'd be there on her own and that she would be looking up and finishing up for the day. And he asked to meet her there to catch up, have a drink, catch up. And she'd said yes. What she didn't know is that her old friend, Crispin, was in financial trouble. And he had wrongly assumed that Eleni would have the keys to the safe. She did not. Not the main safe. The main safe would have had up to £10,000, maybe more in it. And the other safe, which he did get into, had £2,000 or £3,000, and he took that. But she did not have the key to the main safe. So he couldn't, his plan failed. Here's a CSI moment for you. They found part of a drinking straw in Eleni's pocket, and it had traces of cocaine and her DNA. So she had used that straw to snort drugs, and one of the wounds on her body was on the back of her neck, and it suggested that she had been bent, like had her head bent over when that stab wound was inflicted. They believe that Crispin had brought drugs to their drinks. She had been doing that, and then he stabbed her in the back of the neck. Just awful. But then to go on with such brutality, 16 more stab wounds. She would have been completely incapacitated from that and possibly dead very quickly from the stab wound to the back of her neck. So that was, like, to me, that's overkill. All of that rage and brutality for money, 10 grand. During the investigation, they found that Crispin had an accomplice. And you know who she is because I've mentioned her name already. Marion Hinshelwood. It's an unusual surname. The very woman that had discovered Eleni's body in the morning. So she knew. She knew that Eleni was there. She knew that she was going to find Eleni's body. And willingly, like, took someone else or let someone else in because she was with another colleague. Like, that's great. Turns out that Marion Hinshelwood and Carlos Crispin were having, they were lovers. And Hinshelwood actually provided him with the knife. I think it was bought from Woolworths. Gave him the knife to commit the crime. What's this? Is it because we're in a pizzeria? I don't know. Pizzeria. Can you believe? So I wonder, and it was thought actually at one point, was she there as well, Marion? They ruled it out. They did rule it out because people did wonder, as I did, did Marion go with Carlos that night? And was she the overkill? Did he initiate the first blow? And then did Marion, inflict more? Turns out it was not true love because Hinshelwood threw Crispin under the bus as soon as she could. She gave the police everything that they wanted and needed. In return, she pleaded guilty to culpable homicide because she gave him the knife. Let's move on to their trials. Eleni's case was tried in May 2009. Hinshelwood was sentenced to 4.5 years. Crispin was found guilty and he was sentenced to a minimum of 22 years. The drops of Crispin's blood around, on the safe, and they found it there too. And at the bottom of the stairs, it clinched it. They were like, okay, it was you were there. Marek was eventually tracked down on the 18th of June. He was hiding out in Slovakia. And then he was extradited back to the UK for trial. He was charged with murder, the R word, and robbery. This makes my blood boil. He had 14 convictions back in Slovakia, 4 of which were violent. And okay, we'll come back to that, but that makes me cross. His trial was in March 2009. He pleaded not guilty. Actually, everything about this makes me cross because he was not a good chap. He was not well behaved. At one point, he didn't even go to trial because he wasn't allowed to smoke. How? Okay, right. I'm not going. Like, okay, really? So he didn't go for 3 days? Like, how is that an option? Okay, that annoys me. And he was bolshy and stroppy and just ill-tempered and awful. He'd throw things about. Just, yeah, that doesn't look good if you've pleaded not guilty either. No one's going to like you. It doesn't matter anyway. He was found guilty and he was given minimum 25 years. Moira's parents and family set up the Moira Fund to support families who had been victims, lost loved ones to murder, with funeral costs and travel to trials and things like that. And Moira's mum is a very strong advocate for not allowing people from other countries into the UK if they have had violent or been convicted of violent crimes. And I think that is all I have for you on today's case. Wild, it caught my interest. 2 women and their stories, their stories had things in common as well. And I couldn't believe that, really. Sometimes things happen and you're like, wow, like stranger than fiction. Is that as the saying? I don't know if you can hear the rain, but it's torrential. We've had storms. It's been amazing. I do love a good storm. Loud storms and epic. Oh, I'll try and get some footage of the storm and I'll put it in. I've never seen, and actually the video that Paul took doesn't do it justice, because in real life it was awesome. We stayed up too late because we were just like watching it. We opened the front door and just stood and just watched the storm. It was cool. Anyway, storm is okay, but rain all the time non-stop, not the one. I quite like it to be dry and chilly. Thank you. Bright sky, dry but chilly. Anyway, I don't have much to add. Oh, I lost my voice, didn't I? I think it's fine now. I think I'm just back to normal. What's going on though? Lost my voice last week, losing a tooth this week. What's next? My marbles. I've got my hoodie on, ready to run down the garden because I'm going to get wet. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic. Hope you join me next week for another true crime story and a glass or a vase or a jar of gin. Love you, miss you, really want to kiss you. See you next week. Bye.